This week on the Finding Free Thought podcast, I got the chance to sit down with Seak Smith, the founder of M.O.M. Super amazing woman. Let me hit you with her bio. Seak's activism started 13 years ago, fighting child sex trafficking through awareness campaigns, fundraisers, protests, marches, panel discussions, and more. Her work has evolved in recent years to anti-grooming and prevention. M.O.M is a culmination of her desire to protect children and their innocence, plus her work with survivors of child sex abuse, along with being a mom of a 12-year-old daughter who is the prime target demographic for this transgender craze. I gotta say, this conversation with Seak really spanned a whole range of topics within the transgender craze. It dealt with the war on the family. We touched on the Jeffrey Epstein case. We touched on plastic surgery and got deep into the whole web of propaganda and social engineering that is targeting children at this time. She really is a wealth of experience and resources. She has worked directly with families healing their children as detransitioners. And so she really speaks from true experience in this regard. Her ambitions for M.O.M are totally epic. She has battalions forming all over North America. I really believe this is going to be a powerful force. At only 3 months old, her Instagram account is a good example of how intensely people want to join this, because she hit something like 10,000 followers in just those 3 months. So I really believe that she is lining up with right timing and right purpose, and that she does really have an army of moms behind her ready to fight back. She's a great human being. I highly encourage you to support her work, give her a follow, and any moms that are looking to join up, get her in your sights and get contacted, because the time to fight is now. As always, please support the podcast. You can do so in a wide variety of ways. I've linked Amanda's website and my website in the description. If you go to her website, there is the opportunity to grab essential oils packages. You can get in touch with her about human design coaching, both incredible resources to amp up your health and wellness and align with your authentic self. You can also support our work by going to the Free Thought Shop, buying some swag. You can get a Free Thoughts Matter shirt. You can get a Team Free Thought shirt. You can help spread the message of free thinking being this crucial element of our society that is under attack, and something that you support. You can also just make donations through Buy Me a Coffee, through PayPal. You can even donate crypto. I'm happy to accept crypto donations. You can even do that through my Twitter if you like. And you can also check out all my other work. I currently have my docuseries Superorganism streaming on dauntlessdialogue.com. And that is, as some of you know, a documentary series on the occulted war on the family, and an exploration of the family as a superorganism that is psychologically and biologically and spiritually designed to gather and protect human wisdom and cast it into the future. It is a really special series. I get not only deep into some really incredible research about the family and the war on the family, but I also share some of my really personal experiences with being a father and being a son, and how that has enriched my understanding of the family as this incredible miracle that really needs to be honored. And I really believe that honoring the family for what it really is a great way to fight back in this war on the family that has been just raging for generations now. Thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for listening. I hope you get a lot out of this amazing conversation with Seak Smith of M.O.M. Welcome, everyone, to the Finding Free Thought podcast. We are happy to have you tuning in today, and very happy to have with us Seak Smith, the founder of M.O.M. So we're going to jump right into it. Welcome to the show, Seak. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thanks for the opportunity to share about what we do.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about it just for our listeners to sort of give us a sense of what you started and why you started it and sort of bring us up to where you are now.
Yeah, I'll go a little further back. About 13 years ago, I got involved with the issue of child sex trafficking. And that has evolved in many ways over the years. I would do anything from awareness campaigns to fundraisers to marches to sitting on panels discussing the topic, and you name it, anything that I could do to speak about it. And then from there, it kind of morphed into more recently seeing what's been happening just across the board when it comes to children, seeing the relentless attacks on children, the indoctrination, the grooming, the over-sexualization, and then me having a 12-year-old daughter who's like the target for a lot of this stuff. I started to shift my activism more into anti-grooming and prevention work. And so that's kind of where I'm at now with Mom Army, is starting to coalesce all of that. I'm a big networker. I have a lot of friends and colleagues across the country and here in the United States. And I started reaching out to everyone because I thought, we're not organized. We need to fight this on a more unified front and with a more unified voice. And so I started making phone calls and texting and DMing everybody that I was either following and admiring, a lot of mom influencers who have been very outspoken about these issues. And then we came together and said, yeah, let's do this. So we initially launched as Million Outraged Moms 3 months ago. August 8th was our launch date. And it was very unofficial. It was just kind of like, here we are, this is what we're coming together to do. And then it just took off from there, and it morphed into Mom Army because it really feels like it's a war on our children. And so my background's in event planning and PR and marketing and branding. So I did a lot of kind of honing in on the message about this being an army of moms to fight the war on children. And so 3 months later, we're getting ready to launch 25 chapters across the country, including Ontario, Canada. We just put together a really, really impressive, incredible advisory council that is going to help steer us and help us in our growth and help us with finding solutions around these issues. So lots of exciting things happening for us in a very short 3 months.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's really cool seeing how quickly your account came into force. It's quite
Mhm.
awesome, and I think it really speaks to how ready moms were to do this, to stand up, and how much it was needed. You say that you have something set up here in Ontario.
Yes.
So what has the
Yep. We
response
have we
been
have
like here?
three. Yeah, we have three wonderful women who are coming together to lead the chapter there. We call them battalions. We actually don't call them chapters.
Yeah.
And then they're captains of our battalions. So I'm excited. I did a Zoom training with them the other day. They're very active. I think what's really different about Mom Army and the people coming into Mom Army are there's a couple of things. I have come to realize I do a lot of work with survivors of child sexual abuse, trafficking, domestic violence, separate from before I started Mom Army. And what I'm finding is we actually have a lot of survivors that come to Mom Army, people who have been through, some of the child abuse that they've had to endure, and then wanting to fight to make sure that other kids will not go through what they went through as children. And so we actually have a large percentage of our members that are survivors. So that's one component, which makes them some of the fiercest warriors that you will ever come across. The fiercest moms are those that have been through some really horrible things themselves. And so the Mom Army in Ontario are coming together to really, I think, one, identify those that are like-minded, feeling, because a lot of people feel really alone in this fight, in their personal friend circles or with their colleagues or their family. They feel like black sheeps. They feel like there's no one else that's thinking the same way as they are. And so a group like this really solidifies and affirms that what they're thinking and feeling is right. And so finding that community to begin with is very solace and very comforting for a lot of our members. And so they want to come together to really bring about change, and they're activated in a way that they want to do more on the ground, as opposed to just being a bunch of keyboard warriors complaining online. So that's really what we're building Mom Army to be, is to be boots on the ground organization that's out there, working on local issues and things like that.
That's amazing because in Canada here, some of the laws are so far, they're so
Mhm.
extreme in comparison, especially with regards to the gender affirmation and all of that. Here in Canada, they changed the human rights laws to include gender ideology way back in 2016.
Mhm. We actually touched on that in our training meeting a few days ago. They brought that up because I told them, I said, I'm not an expert in your local politics in your area, so I would have to defer to you on what is possible. So we were talking about how to protest some of the things that they weren't in agreement on, and making sure that that taking into consideration the laws of the land. So the human rights law came up in our discussion on how we kind of navigate that.
It's a big part of the warfare, and I really appreciate you identifying it as warfare because it truly is that. I've been studying this topic for years, and it
Mm.
seems to fall under this larger umbrella of the war on the family. And
Yeah.
the war on the family is broken out into different strategies where it targets the father and the mother and the child using different warfare tactics. Um, and so a big part of that, it seems to be, in terms of children, is just the war on innocence.
Yeah.
So what have
Yeah.
you, over the years, what have you identified in terms of the war on innocence, like in media, for
Mhm.
example? What has been your experience with that, and what intentions do you have to sort of push back in terms of that war on children maintaining their innocence as they develop?
Well, it's interesting you brought that, because if you look at our mission, it's we are activating millions of mama bears and our allies to protect children and their innocence. So that was very intentional to put that in our mission statement. It's because, and I actually feel like I come from a unique perspective just because my kids are so far apart in age. My oldest is now 24 and my youngest is 12. So they're 12 years apart. I have watched the change of how I had to raise my son versus my daughter, and it is completely different. What has come into the lexicon of our society, and the language, and what they're being exposed to. He didn't have to deal with any of this when he was 12 years old, and what my daughter has to deal with is completely unacceptable. I mean, I don't even know how, and trying to, and my daughter's in public school, so I have a personal inner turmoil with myself. Both all my kids went through public schools. I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. I left a year or so, a little over a year ago last summer, to move to Arizona because it was just no longer the place that I wanted to raise my daughter, and to give her a little bit of a better chance when it comes to her schooling. And so we love her public school. So far, so good. I'm very vigilant. Obviously, considering the work that I do, I am, and having to navigate protecting her in that space of public education is anxiety ridden. I don't even know how else to describe it. I actually spoke at a school board meeting back in September, addressing the fact that every day I'm badgering my daughter, asking her what's being taught to her, all these things that shouldn't even be a conversation that I have with her. I told them, I said, I would rather just drop my daughter off at school and say, hey, honey, have a wonderful day at school. I'll see you when I pick you up. But instead, every morning, it's the stress-ridden morning drives of trying to say, hey, are any of your teachers going by any pronouns? I'm digging and looking for any, any red flags where I have to like become a little bit more protective. So yeah, so I do see the difference, going back to your question, is just what you see in entertainment has completely shifted. It was kind of seeping in very stealth before, and now it's so overt. It's just in our face all the time.
Do you find that this is often written off as as conspiracy theory, or as just sort of right wing paranoia, or what's some of the pushback that you've gotten about your mission?
Yeah, it's a I'm sorry. It depends who you talk to. So I've built a network of friendships from I mean, I call my group of friends and my colleagues like the UN, because I've built a network of friendships from every political leaning, every ethnic background, every religious background. So I get a good sense, from the different people that I engage with and have friendships with. And it varies, right? For those that are in this space, we see it. It's so glaring, it's so obvious. But for those that aren't really paying attention, they're a little shocked and taken back by what's actually happening when you inform them. So I'll have a conversation with a friend, say I haven't talked to in, say, 6 months or something, and they'll ask me, what are you up to? And of course, Mom Army comes up. And when I explain to them why I'm in this fight and why I created Mom Army, the first thing they say is like, oh my God, Seek, I had no idea any of these things were going on. So, and that is the sign of the times, just because our media is very selective with what they cover and what is out there for the masses to consume. And so a lot of people are just blind and in the dark about what's actually happening. So until you're actually going down the rabbit holes, digging and looking for information and looking for truth, you're living in an alternate reality where you don't even know that these issues exist. So that's where we're at. We're fighting to get information out there. We're fighting to change hearts and minds. We're fighting to activate people to rise up, because like we said earlier, this is a literal war on our children, and we are not treating it as such, at least not the masses. It's a very passionate few. But I think I'm hoping that there will be some shift as we start to really get the information out there.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's great that you've built up a network of political diversity, because the media, of course, they really try to spin this as a left and right versus right wing issue. Right? There's often this narrative, especially when it comes to gender ideology and gender affirmation, that the right is very they're against trans kids. And that the left is saving them, and then you look at the work of someone like Billboard Chris, who spent all of his time now just touring and having one-on-one conversations. And I know, I've seen his Twitter feed, and he gets so much support from people who are on the left. So do you have like a sense in your mission of specifically disrupting that narrative, of helping people who might be stuck in that dichotomy?
Yeah, and it's very much intentional in our mission. So there are so many mom groups that have popped up in the last couple of years, and they're all doing incredible work to just bring awareness to the issues in the schools and the indoctrination and the materials, and all that stuff. What's a little different about us is because we're kind of a big tent. In our core values, we talk about the fact that we don't care what your political leaning is, your ethnic background, your religious background. Do you care about children? And if you deeply care about children, this is the place to start this fight. We don't want to get into the weeds of some of the other issues that we may disagree with. And believe me, in our group, there's lots of disagreements in terms of political leanings and stuff, but we all agree on one thing. And that's where we have to find the common ground in order to be effective in this fight. And that's what we do. And we partner with so many organizations. Speaking of Billboard Chris, I had the opportunity to meet him when we did our protests in Anaheim, California, back on October 8th for the Unity Rally against the American Academy of Pediatrics. And I also met him at the movie premiere for Disconnected by Don Johnson, who he is featured in the film. What he does is, he's one person, but look at what one person can do. Yeah. Right. And for me, is seeing it from a collective perspective. If we can have a collective of people coming together to really sound the alarm, to beat the drum and to beat it louder and louder. We're partnered with Gays Against Groomer. Jamie Michelle, who heads Gays Against Groomer, has become a friend. She actually, fun fact, she designed our logos for Mom Army and Million Outrage Mom. She's a graphic designer. Yeah. We partner with so many organizations. Our Duty, which is a group of parents whose kids have detransitioned. We partner with trafficking organizations that fight trafficking, such as Veterans for Child Rescue, which is out of Texas. And so for us, the goal is to bring together a coalition of people who are fighting this in different ways and on different fronts to really move the needle and change policy around it.
So when we're looking at the narrative that's been built, because I think this has been building for a long time. I know there's been this recent escalation in gender ideology, but I think some of the foundations for that were really laid down already for it to have moved forward, right? And I think that's one thing that's important for people to understand, that when you're dealing with warfare, I think one of the forms of warfare going on is about ideological subversion that's very slow and careful and goes step by step. So now we're at this point where you have some people saying that children who have gender dysphoria, they need rescuing medically or else they're going to commit suicide. And you have these narratives. And I think what's sad about that is it really tugs at the heartstrings of caring parents.
Yeah,
Have you had the
that's why it's been
chance?
so effective.
Yeah, have you had the chance to
Mhm.
connect with any parents then? Because you said you were working with some parents who have detransition kids about that
Yeah.
process of appealing to the natural empathy of parents and how that's been a tool of warfare.
Yeah, and it is. It's really, I mean, there's another organization we're getting ready to partner with called Parents for Ethical Care, and they're out of Dallas, Texas. Martha, who was one of the co-founders, her situation is really interesting. And very few parents who are in the detransition community can be vocal. They're really scared of the attacks. They are silent for all the reasons that we know about, but also to protect their child. That they're going through this very, very traumatic process of detransitioning, coming to the realization of and regretting what they've done. And so in her case, and I know I can share this because she's one of the vocal ones, but her son was not your typical target for transgender ideology. He was a star football player and was also on their debate team in high school in Texas. And so usually, the ideology targets children who are really vulnerable, autistic children with special needs, children who are, maybe antisocial. They don't have the social capacity to be really engaged. And so what you're seeing with this, with the sweep, I'm trying to find words for it sometimes, but it's the sweeping nature of transgender ideology that is kind of overtaking our entire society, and especially in the preteen age group, targeting young girls specifically, is that there's all this manipulation tactic, and even towards the parents, like you said, it's really emotional blackmail, right? When you think about what the terminologies that they're using. And we're not just talking about, we're talking about the largest institutions in our government and in our society. We're talking about this is being pushed by the medical establishment, right? The pharmaceuticals, it's being pushed by entertainment, it's being pushed by our education system. From the top down, it's being pushed, by our government, our federal government, from the White House. And so what chance does a 12-year-old or a parent have against fighting this ideology if it's coming at them from every major institution that is influencing throughout society? So that's what we have to come to the realization of what this fight actually looks like. And until we do that, there is no way to be effective and to really change and shift things around.
Yeah, I've been really digging deeply into this. There was an article, I think it's Scientific American, and it claims to be like the be all end all science on transgender youth. And I was going through the studies, and they're very careful in this article because it's a lot of citations. They're very careful only to cite American studies, American institutions. And the more I research this, the more that seems to be really purposeful, because then when you look over to like the UK and what's
Yeah.
happened with the NHS, it kind of blows up the narrative here. And specifically, one of the things that was cited in the shutting down of the gender clinic at Tavistock was that they had copied the American model, and that's what
Yeah.
they needed to correct. And so you have on the
Yeah.
one hand, Britain really sort of shifting things, I think, in a much healthier direction. They're looking now at more holistic care. But then over here in Canada, it's kind of an interesting contrast, because in Canada, the ideology is quite far along. And yet, one of the biggest studies, I don't know if you've heard about this, but one of the biggest studies they've done on transgender youth came right out of Toronto here, where they looked over, it was about 34 years. And they looked at transgender youth over those 34 years, and they followed up with them when they were adults. And what they found was that 87.8% of them desisted, and only 17% of them actually stayed. So, you have this tension here where while in Britain, the studies actually did change the policies, here in Canada, we have a study that completely shows that most of these kids desist. And the other thing that the study found was that I think it was 64% of the kids that desisted turned out to be gay.
Yeah,
So, which is another reason
not
why,
surprising.
yeah, I think it's another reason why Gays Against Groomers is a really important voice, because a lot of gay and lesbian youth are being indoctrinated in
Mhm.
this. So, it looks like one of the things that's needed is this sort of global unity so that we can blow up that bubble. Like America and Canada have really formed these little information bubbles that I think trap parents. Like, have you come across the research that really shows the difference between the countries and how this is being managed in terms of, America being so indoctrinated in its higher echelons?
Yeah, I mean, we can we can even go back into history about American propaganda, right? And so we have a machine here when it comes to how information is disseminated. It really is a captured, industry when it comes to our media, and captured by the pharmaceutical companies. When you turn on, I don't watch. I mean, I am very selective with what I watch, but when I do, every now and again, I was just at a hotel in Minneapolis, and when you watch regular television, you realize every other ad is a pharmaceutical ad. So they're all very captured by the money that is being funneled through these institutions, right? And so, yes, I have come across all of that. And I've been watching very closely what's happening in the UK and in Europe in general when it comes to them scaling back, some of these, theories and practices, and trying to course correct, which is a good thing. Science is supposed to be observing, and over time what the results are, and then you would adjust accordingly. But here in the US, it is driven by propaganda, it's driven by ideology. None of it is driven by any of the studies that are starting to come out to show that this is actually very harmful. And we talk about the oath of our medical, medical professionals, where our going back to our rally in Anaheim, it was called the first do no harm, because that's what our doctors take an oath to. And instead, we are our institutions are going the complete opposite. Instead of proceeding cautiously and looking to find the root of the problem, looking to, when I talk to different groups, when I talk to some of my friends who are like, they'll say things like, "Seek, I was such a tomboy growing up." I mean, there was one person I talked to who showed me a picture of herself when she was 5, and she looked like a little boy. And I said, "Who's that little boy?" And she's like, "No, that's me." She's like, "I love to, I put on baggy clothes and hats," because she was sexually assaulted as a 5-year-old. She was brutally abused. And her 5-year-old mind thought that if I dress up like a boy, maybe that will protect me from being sexually abused. And now she's this very feminine mom of 5, and we don't, our therapy in our professionals in the therapy world are not getting to the root of the problem. Everyone is being fast tracked. And because that has been the official policy coming from the American Academy of Pediatrics. If a child goes into a pediatrics office gender confused, or the parents are concerned, first thing they do is refer them to a gender clinic. What the pediatrician doesn't realize is once they get referred to a gender clinic, they're on a fast track to hormone blockers, to puberty blockers, to transgender, surgeries. And now it's happening with minors. And there's this big denial that they're not performing these surgeries on minors. And we have detransitioners that are saying, "Hey, I got a double mastectomy when I was 15 because this is what was recommended to me." Or hospitals that have on their website gloating about these minor surgeries, but then denying that they're actually doing it. And so we just have this, I mean, let's call it what it is. It's blatant lies and propaganda, and that's what we're dealing with.
Oh, absolutely. I was just looking at this the other day. There's a really great example of that. I believe it's an NBC article where they say Boston Children's Hospital is not performing surgery on minors, and then Boston's Children's Hospital had the video where they said we are performing these surgeries on minors.
Right.
And so they will.
Yeah.
They will outright lie to the public, which it kind of brings you to a different level of this, where it's like, on the one hand, you have people who are just ideologically captured, who are doing their best, but they are immersed in an ideology. But on the other hand, you see things like that, and it seems like there is a sort of evil, willful intention of harm. So how
Yeah.
have you sorted through that in terms of there being people who seem to actually wish harm and who are willing to do immoral, unethical things to make sure this goes through? I mean, what is your opinion of that I guess that force within all of this?
Yeah. Well, I have this weird fascination of studying like cults, and I study like there's this period of my life where I was really fascinated by Edward Bernays, who's like the godfather of propaganda here in the U.S. He's the reason why we eat bacon for breakfast. The pork industry was losing money, and then he decided to put this message out there that you needed to eat bacon for breakfast, and all of a sudden the pork industry was saved, and then till this day we're still eating pork for breakfast. So what you're looking at is not only is it captured, but you're looking at a cult, because it has all the makings of a cult. You get ostracized, you get excommunicated, you get all the things, right? And what I am learning as I'm going through this process of building Mom Army and getting involved in these rallies and these protests, I was, like I said, the one in Anaheim, I helped plan that with Aaron Friday from Our Duty, along with a couple other ladies. And then the one in Nashville, I attended that one with Matt Walsh as well. And then I just went to a recent rally in San Diego that was, we were protesting the drag show, the all ages Boo Bash Halloween drag show in San Diego. And that was attended by the mayor of San Diego. It was attended by their county supervisors. And this was out on an open parking lot. It wasn't in an enclosed facility, which was what I thought at first, but it was open. And the most jarring thing for me was, it's one thing to see it on video that parents are taking their children to these all ages drag show where men are are dressed very provocatively and doing really, dances that, children shouldn't be exposed to. But to see it in person, to actually look through the fence and see families and parents sitting there with their children at these events, we're facing something that is unlike anything we've ever faced before when it comes to this. There was a moment in time where we all kind of agreed, right? We agreed that this is not okay for children. And all of a sudden that's been flipped upside on its head. And we are living in different realities where we're talking from two different extremes. On one hand, our side is like, this is not good for children, it's harmful for children. And on the other side is like, well, it's inclusion and we want to teach our kids about, all these different people. So how do we find common ground on that? We are in complete disagreement here. And so that's what I mean by the cult and it's beyond being captured. It's really become a cult. And the most effective thing that we have found in some of these protests is we have to call them out for what it is. We can't be nice about it anymore. And that's kind of the brand of Mom Army. We are kind of a rebel rouser mom group that will take no mess from anybody. And so what I noticed at the protests is when we're hurling at them and saying, you're grooming children, and saying, we use very straightforward language, they really don't have anything to say to come back to that. So that has been really effective. And we do these protests with our friends from Gays Against Groomers. So they try to sit there and say, oh, you're a homophobe or you're a transphobe. I'm like, sure, go ahead and call me all the names you want. But, we've got a pretty vast coalition fighting this. And so I think there's some headways to make when we can speak truth very boldly and very unapologetically. That's what I see as being effective, at least on the ground during these rallies and protests.
The cult aspect to it, I think, is something that is important for a lot of people to understand, because what seems to have happened is, I think there were, the cult aspect has always been there, but maybe a little more private, maybe a little more hidden, and now it's out in the open. And from my research, there are genuinely cults who seek to do things like this to children. And I know that in, child sex trafficking, there's sometimes cult, ritual cult abuse and, satanic abuse and things like this. What have you found in terms of the child trafficking element of it and the cult element of it? And, I guess that the more hidden aspects becoming more public now.
Well, one of the, I've literally gotten a crash course on all of this in the last few months because of my partnerships and coalition building with all these different organizations and learning about the stuff, deep diving into a lot of these things. One of the most jarring things that I learned recently is that there is this underbelly of darkness in the trafficking world, that trans kids are getting more money. That perpetrators are paying more money for children who are trans. So there is a sick underbelly. I don't, obviously, when I heard that information, when I heard that tidbit, I thought about it, and I'm like, it's such a sick, twisted world. I'm not surprised, right? I'm not surprised that there are people out there that are willing to pay more for trans children, trans teens. And so there's this case. We are partnered with an organization, a friend of mine who has become a good friend now, Ryan Heath. He's a constitutional lawyer here in Arizona, but he started an organization, a 501c3, called the Gavel Project. And the Gavel Project is looking to basically file lawsuits and go through the litigation process of protecting children and protecting freedoms and protecting all sorts of rights. And one of the cases that he has taken on and we are helping to bring awareness to and fundraise for is a case of this transgender teen who was the makings of all the things that are wrong in the transgender ideology. The school transitioned her behind her parents' back, her legal guardian, which is her grandmother and her grandfather. And then from there, I want to make sure I'm not getting into the facts of the case wrong, but essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, the grandmother wouldn't affirm the transition and was not going by her preferred pronoun and lost custody of the child. There was a judge that was really ideologically inclined to remove the child from the parents. And so then she was removed and then went into the custody and then became custody of the Child Protective Services, right? And from there, she because she identified as a boy, was put into the boys unit when the Child Services took over the case. And then there was rape involved in this, and then she was later trafficked. Because she ran away from all the other trauma that was being inflicted on her. So it was one trauma after another, one of the most egregious cases I have ever read around this issue. And so we are looking to basically sue everybody that has caused this child harm in the most unthinkable ways. And so, yes, so there is this underbelly that I am starting to learn and understand in the trafficking world, where trans kids and trans youth are sought after and are garnering more money from the perpetrators. So
yeah, I recently was
dark stuff.
It gets very dark. I was chatting with the Gavel Project, and they were saying that girl is now safe back home,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yep.
That's great. That's great
Yeah.
news. Well, to be honest, I have been aware of some of the darker things for a long time now. There's a lot of people who try to speak out saying that they were victims of satanic ritual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And they get brushed off. It gets called satanic panic. They get told that nothing like that is happening. And then you look at things like, the Jeffrey Epstein case. And I think it's really, really telling that you have that case that was watched around the world, and we still don't have anyone from the list arrested or identified at all. So what do you see is going on there in terms of people in power in this dark underbelly? What does that show to you in the work that you do?
I believe the Jeffrey Epstein case is a glaring example of high-powered people who are part of this very sick, twisted world of trafficking. Otherwise, why wouldn't we have a list? Why wouldn't we have no arrests came out of that. No one's been named. Nothing else has happened since. And so we understand that there's a very corrupt system where perpetrators and pedophiles are being protected. There's just no other way around it. And that's what we have to really come to terms with. We have a society that not only doesn't protect children, but harms children.
Yeah.
And that is why this is, a lot of our members of Mom Army is like, this is the hill I'm willing to die on, because we see it as a system that is here to hurt children.
It does seem to be in the intentional design. And you're right. When you have people high in power like that, and then you have gender ideology, which is specifically being used to try to rename pedophiles into minor attracted persons.
Mm-hmm.
And you see the way that ideology is being used to normalize pedophilia, and then it's being supported by all these people in power. It's really hard not to I guess, theorize about conspiracies, which is really what they tell you is the most dangerous thing to do. And I've always felt like, if you live in a society where theorizing about conspiracies is a thought crime, you might have actual problems with conspiracies.
Right. Exactly. I mean, and and the CIA came up with the term conspiracy theories to shut down people who were questioning what the government was doing. And so if we can look at the root of how conspiracy theories was even theorized or was even started, we can understand that those of us who question anything are going to be labeled that. And I'll proudly wear the conspiracy theory hat. That's not a problem. One of our mom army did a post the other day, and she said, I'll proudly wear a conspiracy tinfoil hat than wear a blindfold, because it's very true. It's like, your instinct should allow you to question things because something doesn't feel right. There's a lot of things that aren't right now in our society, and we should all be able to question it without being name called. But that's where we're at, and the more people who are willing to be outspoken, the more that people can show courage, the more that I hope that will inspire others to do the same, because everybody can't be under this spell. Everybody can't be under this mass psychosis, which is what's been happening for the past few years.
Yeah, in terms of language, I think conspiracy theory is another really good example of just terminology being introduced and reframed and repeated, because this is what they've done with, gender affirming care and gender ideology. It's a big language game. And you're right, the CIA they invented that term to distract from their involvement in the assassination of JFK. And then years later, a CIA historian released a document showing that the CIA really they were involved. They really were involved, and there was an actual conspiracy. And so you really it's kind of interesting that years later, the origins of that word, it proved that all of that was quite valid for the people at the time, right? And I think I really encourage people to embrace the term as well. If you accept that it's a negative term, you're accepting their twisted meaning of it. When really, when you define those two words, just theorizing about conspiracies, there is no negative connotation. All the negative connotation just comes from the mockingbird media saying it in a negative light again and again. So it's another waking up that I think.
It's a war on words, right? Like you said, when they frame, they've masterfully, changed definitions and changed words to align with their agenda that unfortunately shuts us down, and we become afraid to even bring it up because people don't like being called racist. People don't like being called bigots. They don't like being called transphobes because those words don't, but if you know yourself to not be any of those things, that's why I can continue to fight, because I don't care. You can call me whatever I've been called transphobe many times online, Twitter, whatever. Doesn't matter, because I know I'm not, I have friends that are trans.
Yes. So what? Absolutely. No, I just see it as resistance training, just something to make you stronger and to keep going. So in the research that I'm doing in this film series, you got to see the first episode of this film series.
I want to say you did. I mean, I don't know if that's the final version of that first part, but you did an incredible job. I mean, I was watching it at 3 a.m. because I realized I was like, oh, I need to reply to this email. I was just up in the middle of the night. And I was like, well, I can't reply to your email until I at least watch what you sent me. And so I sat there and watched, I laid in bed and watched it. And it was so compelling. And I'm from Los Angeles, so, I have a lot of filmmaker friends and stuff, but what you've done really well is connect the dots with such great visuals and such historical context that I think you are going to be able to really get the message out on why this is all making sense, in terms of the historical context and where we're at today. So you did that beautifully.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because, one of the things I'm looking to do is access this idea of these broad cultural strokes and take people out of the idea that this is all politicized, because it's really not. In the end, it's not actually politicized. So when we look at something like the plastic surgery industry and just that culture in general, I'm very curious about the difference between us just being unaware of the consequences of our culture versus intentional social engineering. So, I mean, someone who lived in Los Angeles, I'm sure you experienced lots of plastic surgery culture. What is your experience of that in terms of the ways that's affected children? I mean, mainly girls. It's the same as trans ideology, right? Plastic surgery mostly affects women and girls. What has been your experience in that area before the whole trans craze sort of took off?
Yeah, I mean, Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, and all those areas. I mean, I actually have friends who worked at plastic surgery centers and big ones. I mean, really, really. I have a friend who worked in one of the most famous, who has all the big clients. I mean, princes from around the world, and big, Hollywood celebrities, and that sort of thing. And it's unfortunate because there's a couple of things that are compounding, right, in our society right now. You have social media, the effect of social media, and the effect of regular media, entertainment media, and celebrity culture, and then the fact that there's this really interesting moment we're into. There's this love yourself and be authentically yourself culture that's been coming to the forefront in the last few years of self-love and self-care and all this stuff, and love exactly who you are, but at the same time hate your body and change, and butcher your body. So it's really this juxtaposition of two completely extreme, like different ideologies existing in one thought. I'm trying to find words for it, but
Mm.
but we are looking at the impact of all the different layers of our society coming at especially teen girls, right? That, I mean, when I was growing up, it was the Cosmopolitan magazines, and it was, all these things that you would flip through magazines, and it was these perfectly sculpted bodies that were in these magazines that were airbrushed. I never That never bothered me, but I had friends around who compared themselves to a lot of those images. Well, take that and times that by 100, because now it's nonstop. It's not just a magazine at a newsstand, or maybe while you're waiting at the grocery store looking at a magazine. It's in your face all the time through social media and through other media formats, and so there's no escaping it, right, as a teen. And for me, that's the biggest struggle of how I raise my daughter, is making sure that I'm protecting her and building her up, and giving her all of the tools and the mechanisms to love herself, right, and to love herself exactly the way she is, and to be proud of it. If she walks by the mirror, I tell her to say, look how beautiful you are, look how, and not just her beauty, but also she's very talented with her art, artistry. She draws and she crochets and she does all these amazing things. And so we need to learn how to build up our especially our youth, to truly, truly love who they are, so that the impact of outside influences doesn't penetrate. And for me, as a parent and as a mom, is making sure that we are her biggest influence. You know that no one else's opinions matter more than her own opinion about herself. That is what matters the most. And until we can really empower our children to have that kind of mindset, we are really going to be, in a battle to fight for their minds, and their hearts, because what we're doing is poisoning our youth's mind about all of this stuff, and confusing them. I mean, confusing them to the level that they would go to the extreme to butcher their own bodies. I mean, that's what we're facing right now, and it's a crisis. I mean, I think one of the most jarring things I learned in all of this too is that during the film documentary for Don Johnson's Disconnected, it was stated that at any given time you can go on to GoFundMe and there would be 40,000 teenage girls fundraising for double mastectomies.
Yeah.
And that really saddens me, that there are that many young girls out there that are so disgusted by their own body that they would raise money to butcher it. And how do we tackle that? I mean, how do we reverse that kind of thinking?
Yeah, I think, there was a lot of talk about smartphones and social media and what age is really appropriate, because we're in this experiment where, there's, it's, as I said in my film, we've never had middle school children on social media with smartphones. Personally, I'm really going to hold off as a parent.
Yeah, please do.
Like, I think that's one of the most powerful things to do is don't hand young children or even young teens smartphones and social media early on. And yet there is a big struggle for a lot of parents because kids naturally want to absorb culture. They are cultural sponges and they want to connect with the culture at large. That is a natural thing for kids to do. And so I think there's a big contradiction there. And I think you articulated it a lot in terms of raising our children. There's a self-love and a self-respect aspect to it so that they can manage their way through the culture and through what we
Yeah.
know is a war. You know, you're
Mhm.
preparing your kids for a war zone. What have you seen in terms of, you know, helping children with free thought, with the ability to think freely? Because I know the way that we look at it, we want them to even be able to challenge us.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know,
that's the toughest part of parenting. When my daughter, questions something that I do or say, or she calls me out on something, I'll look at my husband and I'll look at her and I said, this is the kind of daughter we're trying to raise. And I have to accept that, and kind of remove my ego out of that, or remove my righteousness of wanting to be right and say, you're absolutely right. It's good that you're asking these questions. And so we have to shift the conventional thinking of parenting, right? For so long, parenting has been very authoritarian. Do as I say, not as I do, right? And it's very punitive, right? And so instead, to nurture a child, you have to be willing to concede to some of their free thought. And that's not easy as an adult or as a parent. And you're having to rewire your thinking to shift into that kind of parenting. And so I catch myself. I mean, there are moments where I'm just like, oh, and it's very different from like how I raised my boys to how I raised her. I'm a lot more wiser. I'm a lot more informed. I'm a lot more, aware of all the things, and I'm a lot more present. And so when we can really impact, part of Mom Army too is that a lot of us on our team have talked about this, is how do we empower parents? But very important piece of that is how do we empower children? How do we empower them to navigate, all the things that are coming at them, to give them all the tools so that they can discern the truth, so that they can be free thinkers. So that's a really important part, because unless you're raising warriors, we're still going to, 10 years from now, you and I are still going to have the same conversation. And we really have to start shifting how children are being equipped for this new society that we're thrusting on them. Like you said, the social media for middle school. Our daughter doesn't have it. I jokingly tell my husband she can't have social media till she's married. I'm like, kidding, not kidding, but because
yeah.
honestly, I mean, would you let a pedophile babysit your child? Absolutely not. That's literally what you're giving to them in the phone. She has a smartphone. She has an iPhone, but it has every restriction on it that it literally acts like a flip phone. So basically, she can call just the phone numbers that are in her contacts. She can't add new numbers to it. She has to get us to add phone numbers to her phone. She can't text pictures. She can't download any games or any apps. She can't go on the internet. She can't do anything. She can literally just call in, call out, and text us. And that's basically the functioning of her phone. And that's on purpose, and I'm okay with that. And she's come to the understanding that she was upset at first, but she gets it. She understands that the biggest role that we have as her parents is to protect her and to love her. And she's okay with it. Now what she does is she has movie nights with her brothers. They pick a movie that they watch, she'll crochet, and she has all these other activities where she's using her hands and doing cool things. And we elevate her for that, and we celebrate that every time she comes to us with a new drawing or a new piece of thing that she's crocheting. And that's that. I like a very innocent 12-year-old child, where she's still sleeping with her teddy bears.
Yes. Again, you're so right. Like the maintaining of innocence is something you can watch so carefully, because you can see it slip away when children really struggle, when they're traumatized. You really see it slip away from them. And I think, you know, a lot of parents are struggling with this. This is another area where the ideology really preys on parents, because sometimes parents think they're letting their child be more free with the trans ideology, for example, right? They think, oh, well, my kid is challenging me. That's good. And to an extent, you know, I really do believe in the philosophy that if your kids aren't ever making you feel uncomfortable with how far they're pushing things, then they're not really free.
Mhm.
They should be doing some things where you feel like some of your boundaries are being pushed. But there is a line that we need to draw here, and I think uh, really it just comes down to messaging. I think the only way is sort of Billboard Chris's approach, which is one conversation at a time. Have you found a lot of opportunities locally to be having conversations with parents, to be addressing some of the trans craze that's going on in your area or in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think, because we are just getting started there, when we have some of these in-person meetups here in Arizona specifically, these conversations absolutely come up. And that's what we're trying to do, open up the dialogue to have these conversations. Like one of one of our team members had shared that her twin daughters, who at the time was 9, came home and said that one of their friend just calls herself as what was the term? I don't know, it was pansexual or one of those terms, or bisexual. And, and she was kind of taken back by it. She goes, huh, that's interesting that a 9-year-old, would have that terminology. But she talked her daughters through it and, explained that, people have differences and all these things. And, but, and as they got a little older, they're now 11, realizing that a lot of this stuff is being planted into these children's minds, that these are not their own free thought, right? That there's a lot of influence from adults that are imposing a lot of these thoughts to them. And so, how do we protect that when teachers are constantly I mean, I'm beside myself that we're even having this conversation where teachers are constantly focused on sexuality instead of academics. Like, how are we here? How are we at a place where teachers feel so comfortable to be pushing this on our children, where there should be other things that they should be focused on, And so there's a lot of, we have to come to a place where we have honest conversations, and then we have to find solutions around it. And so I don't have all the answers, honestly. I mean, I just feel like we need to start finding ways to come together to find solutions to reverse some of these things that are taking away their innocence. That's probably one of the important missions that we have, is to bring back the innocence of a child. And I know that from working with a lot of survivors, when you talk about, the trauma or how it changes them. And it does, when I talk to those that say when they were unfortunately sexually abused by a family member, a lot of times it seeps in slowly. They get introduced to porn at a very young age, or they get introduced to images that they don't know how to discern those images or how to question them or anything, or to even know that they're wrong. And so those are the mechanisms that are being used to create victims and to create vulnerable children so that they can be abused later. And so until we realize that how impactful these images are on children, we're not going to change. We're not going to fix the problem.
So, what have you seen then in terms of like children recovering from this? Because I know there can be quite incredible recoveries from some of the worst forms of abuse. What have you seen work? Like, what has helped some of these kids come back from some of these abuse scenarios?
Yeah, so for what I've seen in my personal work, so I've done a couple of healing retreats for survivors, and we use every modality imaginable. When you talk to a therapist, or you talk to those that are kind of more in the new age healing, there's a lot of talk about plant medicine and all sorts of ways to heal from trauma. People have to navigate this kind of like as an experiment and figuring it out on their own. A lot of my friends who have done a lot of healing work have done it just based on trying different things, trying breath work, trying ice baths, trying meditation, trying yoga, trying like anything that can bring peace to the mind. Because that's probably the biggest thing when it comes to healing is quieting the mind and finding peace in the mind. And that's what has worked for some, actually one of our advisory council, who is a really good friend of mine, Annalyn McCord, she's an actress in Los Angeles. And she is very public about her sexual abuse by a family member. And there's been art, she's interviewed for articles in magazines and InStyle and talks about that. But she has spent the last 4 years healing herself around that trauma. And she's done it, she's done the ice bath from, and the breath work from Wim Hof. And, she did a podcast with him. And so she's tried everything, and it has worked so well for her. She is a different person. I mean, I've known her for quite a few years now, but who she was just 4 years ago and who she is today is night and day. I mean, she exudes happiness and light and love, and even her wardrobe reflects it now. She used to wear like black and brown and leather and all the dark stuff, and now she's wearing these colorful floral prints, every day. And because her inside is now reflecting her outside, and her wardrobe is a testament to that. So I love to see the evolution of who she's become through her healing process. And she shared a lot of it. She has facilitated some of the healing workshops that we've used at our retreats. Specifically the breath work is what she credits for a lot of her healing.
I've done quite a bit of research into whistleblower Kathy O'Brien. I don't know if you've come across her work, right?
Yeah,
and
I know who you're talking about. Yep.
She has some really, interesting protocols. She talks about the difference between verbalizing the abuse versus writing it down. And in her protocols, you don't verbally share anything. You write everything down first. You put that away. I think it's for like 30 days, and then you come back and read it and see what it still does in your body. She's done some amazing work in sharing her healing journey. And, that's a person who I think really connects a lot of this to some politicians and some elites in some interesting ways. Yeah. But one of the things she talks about is the way they targeted her as a mother, because her daughter had also been pulled into the same programs as her. And, I've really been looking into a lot of like how a lot of this seems to be targeting like women specifically and mothers and fertility. There seems to be a broader thing going on here, especially when we look at, number one, how the trans phenomenon is affecting more girls than it is boys right now. Yeah. And so what you have is we're losing fertility of our species to a great extent. You have a lot of girls being sterilized. But at the same time, you also have the trans ideology invading women's spaces and actually regressing women's progress. So what do you see in terms of, I guess, like the war on mothers that seems to be connected to all of this?
Yeah, I mean, until you start connecting those dots, and you did that beautifully, people don't want to admit that, there was a very, very large chunk of American history of eugenicism, of eugenics, right? And it's just, and it's still there. It hasn't gone away. It's just taken different forms. You look at Planned Parenthood and how Planned Parenthood came into existence. And then you look at, now, and then you fast forward to the transgender ideology, and it's about sterilization. It's about procreation. It's about, reducing the population, right? And so when you start to connect those dots, you start to see a really sinister agenda, but it's there. For those of us who have been in the space, it's glaringly obvious. You can't deny it, what is being done. And then even looking, Ricki Lake, I met her at an event that I did, but Ricki Lake, the TV, the talk show host, she did a documentary. The first documentary she did was like the business of it's blanking. But then she moved on to the business of birth control. So it was the business of basically birthing, of having a baby, the hospitalization and all of that. And so she dug really deep into that. And then she dug into the business of birth control. And you see the same agenda. You see the same as birth control was about liberation and all these other things. And then now you're seeing that women are basically being sterilized who are on birth control for a very long time. They are having trouble with infertility, with fertility, and they're having trouble having babies. I mean, I have friends who can't get pregnant, and a lot of them were on birth control for a very, very long time. I was one of those. I'm kind of weird with my thought process sometimes when I look back to the decisions that I've made for my body and my health. It was kind of like just an instinct. One day I woke up, I was like, maybe I should stop taking this birth control thing because it doesn't feel right to stop my body from doing what it's supposed to do. And so after I had my second son, who's now 19, I stopped taking birth control just off of this, instinctiveness that I felt. But I have friends who've been on for 10, 20 years and they can't have babies and they can't get pregnant, and they've had to turn to very expensive infertility, fertility process. And then some have just conceded to adopting because they cannot get pregnant. And so we're seeing the ramifications, right? 20, 30 years later of birth control. So yeah, all the same agenda. You just have to start connecting the dots.
Yeah, this is something that I'm doing. I have another series that's out right now called Superorganism, and I'm looking into the war on the family. And there's this document that it's called the Toronto Protocols, and it was it's basically these two documents that outline meetings that these global financiers had in Toronto in 65 and 87. And they called themselves the 666. So they identified as a sort of more satanic group, it would seem. And this, one of the things they talk about is birth control, about, they claim that they helped design birth control in their own like labs and through their own Masonic lodges, and that they planned on releasing it while pushing feminist ideology to its logical extremes. And it was about combining, taking feminism very, very far in these extreme directions at the same time as introducing birth control, and that would help remove the mother from the family unit and break down the family unit. And so, you look at this and, a lot of people, again, the term conspiracy theory gets thrown around, but you look at these documents, and even if they're fake, they are so extremely accurate to what is going on right now. It's so exactly what is going on right now that it's worth reading anyway. Like, I really encourage people to go read these documents because it lays it all out. But I think when we're looking now at this war in the family and the war on fertility, I have to say that anytime someone says there's an overpopulation problem, like that person is a red flag for me. We listen to like Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab going on about overpopulation. I think people really don't understand that it's totally the opposite, that we're looking at a struggle to produce babies in the next few generations.
Across the globe.
Yeah.
Not just, I mean, definitely in Western countries, in the Western world, but across the globe. I mean, when we look at the labor force and we look at, what's happening with the shortage of labor, it's all a reflection of, of this myth that there's this overpopulation. And when it's not, the birth rate has been dropping tremendously. You rarely find people who have more than 2 kids. Like my mom grew up with 7, plus her, so seven siblings altogether. But that's so rare now. Although I have some friends who have quite a few kids. On the more conservative side, I have friends who have 5, 6 kids. We have one of our M.O.M Army chapter leaders in North Carolina who has 14, but 7 of them, I think half of them are adopted, and the other half are her biological children. But society frowns upon that. They frown upon motherhood. I think about I was just talking to one of our chapter leaders this morning because she was really saddened about, and she's in California, about Proposition 1 that was passed, which is the abortion, allowing abortion up to the moment of birth, up to 40 weeks. And, she was really just kind of taken back by that. But, just on that front with that issue, it's just that, we are creating a society for a very long time that disregards motherhood, right? That scares young girls into thinking that if you have a child, that it's the end of your life. And putting a lot of fear around motherhood has created the society that we have, where abortion has become such a go-to. It's no longer rare, and it's more of an elective procedure that people are utilizing. And so we really have to, when you talk about culture, right, we have to shift culture into honoring motherhood, into embracing motherhood, into teaching young girls that it's the most beautiful thing that you will ever do is become a mother. That is, of all the things that I've done in my life, nothing will ever compare to me being a mom. And so we have to shift that narrative. And how do we do that? Because otherwise we will still be having the same conversation.
I think, culture, it's funny. I'm torn because on the one hand, I really feel like there's this culture war and we need to participate in the culture war itself. At the same time, I feel like one of the problems is that we've become too obsessed with culture itself, and it's disassociated us with life and the body. And I think that seems to be a big part of the return. You see this theme with, people recovering from abuse. It's this return to their body. It's like coming back into the body. You see with motherhood, there's like a return to honoring female biology and female fertility. And so, I really see that part of what we need to do is actually return to the beauty of our actual physical biological nature, instead of being so obsessed with culture that we lose sight of that. Like, I think culture itself is what was used to disassociate us from our body.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. Because we take, I think Don Johnson in his film of Disconnected actually touched on that at the very end of the film, of talking about the soul and the body. And for so long, we are a society that has separated the soul from the body. right? When we need to merge the two together, the soul and the body is one, right? So when you dishonor the soul, when you dishonor the body, you're also dishonoring your soul. And so it's a really interesting, topic to touch on, but I absolutely agree with you. I think the more we come to self and the more we come to respecting and honoring our bodies and our soul, then that will reflect outward into the world. And so, yeah, so, and you're starting to see that in some of the population where people are really understanding, regulating your nervous system and really, coming into who you are and accepting yourself for who you are. But yeah, you're right. It's like your perspective of both is very, I mean, two things can be true at the same time is basically what I'm saying. And what you're saying, it's both of it is true.
Yeah, that's well, I mean, that's a big part of the battle here. I think we're getting to a point where there is a growing awakening. There is literally a momentum of awakening occurring, and this is one of the contradictions where things are kind of crazier and more chaotic than they've ever been.
Unsettling, yeah, chaotic.
But that is also, I think, the force that's awakening more people, and we just have to learn to use it. That if they're going to keep waging more warfare, then we keep using it to wake more people up, and that seems to be the best way to move forward.
Yeah, and it's really actually part of our mission and our motto is to help awaken more people, because it is very unsettling to see that kids are being attacked and relentlessly, right? But that's unfortunate for some people that it takes that to wake them up. And we have to find ways to amass that awakening, so that we can change things, right? There needs to be a destruction of the current system, which is why everything feels so chaotic, in order to rebuild something better and newer in its place. And that's my hope. Honestly, I tell the team all the time, we work in a very dark place, right? It's violence against children, it's sexual abuse against children, it's, the transgender ideology and mutilating of children, but we can't be consumed by the darkness. We can't stay there, right? So I always tell my team to really navigate themselves throughout their days of saying, okay, we are very aware of this. We know this is going on. This is part of our reality, but we can also create another reality where we bring a lot of love and light into all of this. And so we're very intentional about how we move through this work, is that we can all have fun doing what we're doing, build community, build a family, within Mom Army, and bring a lot of love and light to some of these very dark issues.
Amazing. Well, could you maybe share with everyone right now ways they can find you and support Mom Army, and if they want to get involved, what they can do? Yeah,
I mean, we're getting ready to launch the chapter, so that's been the hardest what do you call it, growing pains for us, being such a new organization and trying to get organized and build the infrastructure to accommodate the demand that's coming of people wanting to get involved. So we've been working really hard as a team to do that. But you can go to our website, mom-army.com. A lot of the information is there, links, to join Mom Army. When we say join Mom Army, it's basically you're declaring that you support our mission. You want to help get our message out there. So a lot of that is online, posting and sharing and that sort of thing. But then when you start a battalion or you start a chapter, that obviously entails a lot more commitment. And so that you go through an application process, and then there's an interview process, and there's an onboarding process that happens with that. Obviously, donation is very, very much appreciated and accepted. We're self-funded right now. We, my husband pours some money into the little things that we need. And so, any bit of funding helps. So we've been doing this on a shoestring budget, and volunteer. It's all been heart and passion. And then, on Instagram, we're Mom with, it's an acronym. So we started off as Million Outraged Moms, and then now we're Mom Army. So it's M.O.M.Army on Instagram. And then from there on our link tree, there's all the links to everything that you would want to get involved. And we're growing, and we're hoping to build, a place for everybody. It doesn't matter what level of involvement you want to be getting into. We want to make sure that there's an option for everybody. If it's just posting online, we want to have an option for that. If it's, showing up for meetups, we will have options for that. And we're doing this throughout the country, and the chapters are growing on a on a regular basis. We're bringing more online, but we're starting off with 25. So I'm excited for that. It's in a lot of the major cities. And so that's where if you're more of an in-person kind of activist, then connect with those chapter leaders. We'll get all of that information on our website so you can connect with everybody. But we tell people thank you for your patience, because it's been such a challenge to try and grow with we knew that there was such a need for this. I honestly had no idea how quickly this would explode and how quickly we would be growing.
Well, that's a good sign, and I think that's probably one of the best challenges you could have, is just people desperate to join up and to fight. That's great.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining on the show. I really look forward to sharing your message and to including your voice in my film work, and I really look forward to supporting everything you guys are doing. It's awesome.
Yeah, and I should also mention one thing before we sign off, is that we're also getting ready to launch Dad Army. So there's been a lot of guys who have been messaging us and saying, hey, I 1000% support what you guys are doing, what the moms are doing. How can we help? How can we support you? And so a lot of men have been rising up and saying, and so we have a Dad Army in the making.
Amazing. I'm in.
Yeah,
100%.
absolutely.
That's great news.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to just have this frank conversation and just to share what we're doing. But I love your work, and thank you for creating a platform to get the message out there.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure. I look forward to having you on again in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon.
All right. Take care.